A 10-year-old black girl accidentally bumped into a boy who was playing around. But she never expected that this boy was the son of Richard, a wealthy, powerful, and arrogant businessman. Richard immediately stood up. His eyes filled with contempt. He didn't care that it was just a small accident. Nor did he notice the fear on the young girl's innocent face. To him, the only thing that mattered was that his son had just been offended. "Who do you think you are to touch my son?" His furious voice echoed, drawing the attention of everyone around. But no one spoke up for the girl. They all knew who Richard was, a rich man with terrifying power. No one wanted trouble. The girl stepped back, her eyes welling up with tears. She didn't understand why this man was reacting so aggressively. It was just an accident. Yet he was looking at her as if she had committed an unforgivable crime. But before she could become any more frightened, a deep, calm, yet commanding voice rang out from behind Richard, "What did you just say to my daughter?" Richard frowned, letting out a mocking chuckle without even turning around. In his mind, this was just another father, probably some laborer, trying to act strong to protect his child. He had seen many people like that before, and none of them could do anything to him. He turned around, ready to throw out another insult. But the moment his eyes met the man standing before him, the smirk on his face froze. The man was tall and imposing, exuding an aura of dominance like a stone monument. His deep, brown skin only made his perfectly tailored, expensive suit stand out even more. His sharp eyes, as cold as a blade, radiated absolute authority. Without needing an introduction, just standing there, his presence alone was enough to make the air around him heavy. A sudden chill ran down Richard's spine. He had no idea that this man wasn't just the girl's father, but also one of the most powerful people he could ever cross paths with. Would he realize his mistake before it was too late? Or would his arrogance drag him into a nightmare with no way out? Leave your thoughts in the comments. At a restaurant on the top floor of a skyscraper, the city lights stretched endlessly like a breathtaking nighttime painting. From here, one could see the entire city shimmering in a mystical glow, creating the feeling of being in a completely different world. This was a place reserved for the successful and the powerful, where every gaze followed only the most distinguished guests. Richard Anderson walked into the restaurant with an air of absolute confidence. He wore an expensive suit, his strides exuding power and authority. A hushed murmur spread through the restaurant as people recognized him, one of the biggest names in the business world. A man no one dared to oppose. He chose a table by the window, offering a panoramic view of the city. Richard paid no attention to the glances cast in his direction. Nor did he care about the surroundings. Even in this luxurious setting, the arrogance in his eyes was unmistakable, as if the world itself owed him something. As soon as he sat down, Richard signaled for a waiter. Without needing to say much, a simple flick of his wrist was enough. He ordered a premium wine and an extravagant meal. To him, this was nothing out of the ordinary. Just another part of his glamorous life. People watched him with admiration, believing he was the very image of success. But what they didn't know was that in this world of wealth and prestige, money and power weren't always the keys to everything. And within this very restaurant, an unexpected incident was about to change everything. Not far away, in a corner of the room, a group of children was playing, laughing carefree, and full of joy. Among them was 10-year-old Kiara. Her deep, brown skin gleamed under the soft lighting, her bright eyes and innocent face giving her an angelic appearance. Kiara wasn't a poor child, But unlike many of the other kids here, she wasn't born into wealth. However, she had something no amount of money could buy: pure innocence and a boundless heart. Tonight, Kiara and her friends had been brought to the restaurant by their parents. Excited and full of energy, she ran around in the elegant space, blissfully unaware of the stark divide between the wealthy and those who didn't belong in this world. As she played, she didn't realize she was moving dangerously close to Richard's table. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the restaurant as Kiara accidentally bumped into Liam, Richard's son. Liam had been running around as well, distracted and unaware, and the collision sent both children tumbling to the floor. Liam let out a small cry of pain as he hit the ground, his face scrunched up in discomfort. Kiara froze, staring at him in shock and fear. The restaurant fell into complete silence. All eyes turned toward the two children. Richard's gaze locked onto his son sprawled on the floor, his expression twisting into rage as he saw Liam clutching his leg in pain. Without hesitation, Richard shot up from his seat, pointing a sharp finger directly at Kiara. "You! Did you not see my son? Do you even have eyes?" His voice cut through the silence, filled with anger. Kiara, despite being just a child, could feel the hostility directed at her. She stood frozen, terrified, unable to understand why this man was so furious. Her lips trembled as she stammered, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't see." Richard had no interest in an apology. Nor did he intend to soften his tone. "Didn't mean to," he snapped, stepping closer, his eyes filled with disdain. "Did you not see my son running? You ruined everything. And now you're saying it wasn't on purpose. Whose daughter are you? Running around without any awareness." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. Some of the onlookers began to feel uneasy about Richard's harsh words. But no one dared to intervene, as unjust as his reaction seemed. They all knew who he was, a man of immense power. No one wanted to get involved. Kiara stood there, tears welling up in her eyes. She couldn't understand why she was being yelled at over something that was just an accident. But she didn't dare to speak back. In this place, she could feel the unspoken divide between people like Richard and children like herself. Tension thickened in the air, the moment growing more intense with every second. No one knew that in this very instant, a storm was brewing, one that was about to erupt. Will Richard's arrogance remain unshaken when a mysterious man steps in? And how will the story unfold as all the misunderstandings and racial discrimination gradually come to light? The tense atmosphere in the restaurant suddenly turned into an almost suffocating silence. All eyes were fixed on Kiara, her frightened gaze locked onto Richard. And tears streamed down her innocent face. She was just a child, possessing nothing but the purity and innocence of youth. Yet now, she had become the center of scorn and harsh reprimand. All because of an unexpected accident. Richard could no longer hold back. He stood there, pointing directly at Kiara, his voice laced with anger. "Little girl, if I see you cause any more trouble for my son, I won't let you off. Get out of here now," he growled, his words exploding like thunder. The onlookers, though unwilling to interfere, couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with Richard's reaction. Still, no one dared to speak up. Suddenly, the sound of the door opening echoed through the room, and a man stepped inside. Tall and imposing, he wore a perfectly tailored black suit, exuding an air of power. He entered the restaurant with slow, deliberate strides, his presence commanding attention without a single word. Within moments, he had drawn every gaze in the room, but Richard remained oblivious, still berating Kiara as if she were unworthy of any respect. This man was Victor Blackwell, one of the most powerful figures in society. A man whose influence few dared to challenge. But no one in the restaurant recognized him immediately, as he was rarely seen in public places like this. Unbothered by the growing attention, Victor walked forward with a calm yet authoritative demeanor. He came to a halt as he took in the scene before him, Richard, towering over a small black girl, his voice dripping with disdain. Victor's instincts instantly told him something was terribly unjust. As he moved closer, Kiara shrank back, her wide, tear-filled eyes fixed on Richard's furious face. The little girl trembled, overwhelmed with fear, unable to comprehend why she was being treated this way. Victor couldn't stay silent. He stepped toward Richard, his gaze cold and unwavering. "What exactly are you doing?" Victor's voice cut through the air, calm but carrying undeniable weight. Each word landed like a hammer. Richard turned around, startled by the interruption. His eyes narrowed as he took in the man before him. "Who are you? What do you want?" he snapped, oblivious to the danger lurking in his words. Arrogance still clung to his every move, as if money and power would forever shield him from consequence. Victor smirked slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm the one you just insulted," he said smoothly. "As for who you are, I honestly don't care. But I do feel sorry for you." Richard gave Victor a once-over, still failing to grasp the gravity of the situation. "What the hell are you talking about? I'm handling my own business. This has nothing to do with you," he shot back, his voice sharp with irritation. "The problem is..." Victor took a step closer, his tone growing colder. "You have no right to humiliate a child over an innocent accident." Richard raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a disdainful smirk. "That girl has no manners. She doesn't belong here. And I won't let anyone stop me from handling this my way." His words dripped with prejudice, as if his wealth alone gave him the right to dictate who deserved respect. Victor studied Richard for a long moment, as if peeling back every layer of his arrogance. Then, with a quiet but undeniable finality, he said, "That's unfortunate, because you have no idea what you've just done." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Victor didn't give him the chance. Instead, he turned to Kiara, crouching slightly so their eyes met. His voice softened, yet still carried a quiet strength. "Listen, sweetheart," he said gently. "Not everyone is worth your tears. Don't let people like him make you feel small." Kiara looked up at him, her teary eyes filled with confusion and awe. For the first time since the incident began, she felt a flicker of reassurance. But she still didn't understand what was happening. Richard, on the other hand, was furious at being undermined. His voice rose sharply. "Who the hell do you think you are? Don't think I don't know your type. I have enough money to erase you and everyone like you from this world." Victor remained unfazed. He stood firm, his expression unreadable, his presence alone exuding an unsettling dominance. "You don't understand," he said calmly. "Money and power don't buy everything." The air grew impossibly thick with tension, the weight of impending consequences pressing down on everyone in the room. But Richard, blind to his own downfall, still had no idea that he was standing on the edge of a storm he would not escape. Richard stood there, still oblivious to the gravity of the situation. His ego was too inflated. His arrogance and display of power laced into every word, every gesture. He had no idea that he was standing before a man whose influence was beyond his comprehension. Without sparing Richard another glance, Victor turned to Kiara, offering her a gentle smile. "You don't need to worry. This will be taken care of right away." He knelt down slightly and gently took Kiara's hand. The little girl, though still shaken, felt a warmth and sense of peace in Victor's eyes. She nodded, not fully understanding what was happening. But somehow, she had the feeling that everything would be okay. Richard remained in place, his fists clenched, his face flushed red with rage. "Who do you think you are? Interfering in my business?" he bellowed, unable to tolerate such an affront. "That girl is just a kid. She has no place here." Victor didn't waver. He turned back to Richard, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Perhaps you don't realize it yet, but here, you are not the one who gets to decide everything." With that, he placed a reassuring hand on Kiara's shoulder and led her away from Richard's presence. Everyone in the restaurant watched the scene unfold. Yet no one dared to intervene. They knew better than to speak up when someone like Richard was involved. However, with Victor's calm and commanding presence, it seemed as though the tide was about to turn. As Victor and Kiara walked away from Richard's space, the latter let out a scornful laugh. "What an arrogant fool. He thinks he can do whatever he wants just because he has money." Victor thought to himself. He didn't rush, nor did he show any outward frustration. But a deep sense of indignation was steadily rising within him. Victor turned back one last time, locking eyes with Richard. His voice was low, but firm. "You will regret your attitude." For the first time, Richard felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping in, doubt. He watched Victor and Kiara leave, uncertainty gnawing at the edges of his mind. Yet, his pride kept him from realizing the full extent of his mistake. His arrogance had blinded him to the fact that he had just crossed a line he could never undo. Victor stepped outside, still holding Kiara's hand, guiding her away from the restaurant. After a brief moment of silence, he spoke. "Are you okay?" Kiara looked up at him, her eyes still teary but filled with gratitude. I'm okay. It's just, I've never been treated like that before." Victor gave her a small smile and gently ran a hand over her hair. "Don't worry, Kiara. No one has the right to treat you that way. No one can look down on you. From now on, you'll understand that people will have to respect you." Kiara nodded, feeling a newfound sense of reassurance. She might not fully understand everything that had just happened, but one thing was certain, her trust in this man was growing stronger by the second. Richard still hadn't realized the gravity of his mistake. Even after witnessing Victor and Kiara leave, an uneasy feeling lingered inside him. But it wasn't strong enough to change his attitude. The people around him, though harboring some doubts about his actions, remained silent. Richard was a powerful man, someone no one wanted to cross. Not long after, during an important leadership meeting in the industry, one of Richard's representatives, looking visibly uneasy, informed him of an urgent meeting he needed to attend. Richard didn't understand why, but he agreed, assuming it was just another minor issue to handle. He entered the meeting room with his usual confidence, though the increasing number of emergency calls had started to make him uneasy. His arrogance remained unshaken, walking with a composed demeanor. His eyes still gleamed with self-assurance, he believed he was in control of everything. The large, lavish conference room fell silent as Richard stepped inside. Executives and corporate leaders were seated, waiting for him. But in Richard's mind, none of them were worth his concern. He only cared about maintaining his position and securing his interests. Victor Blackwell, a name he had only heard in passing, was certainly not someone he feared. Victor stood alone, facing Richard with an unreadable, cold gaze. Yet Richard failed to sense the tension in the air. He sat down, crossed his legs, and spoke with his usual arrogance. "Victor, I don't understand why you're blowing things out of proportion over such an insignificant incident. I thought you were a smart man. So why let a minor accident interfere with our business? There's no need to treat this like I've committed some kind of crime." Victor remained silent, observing Richard, wondering how a man could be so oblivious to the price he was about to pay for his arrogance. Richard continued, his tone indifferent, filled with a subtle challenge. "Aren't we supposed to have common goals? So why are you making a fuss over this? I don't have time to play games with people like you." The tension in the room grew thicker. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that this was no ordinary meeting. A few of them, seasoned veterans in the industry, shifted uncomfortably, fully aware that something serious was unfolding. Victor let the silence stretch, allowing Richard's arrogance to fully expose itself before finally speaking. "Richard," he said, his voice calm but weighted with authority, "do you realize that what you just said isn't a sign of intelligence or understanding? You're talking about a child, a completely innocent child whom you humiliated simply because you thought you could. Do you understand that your actions weren't just disrespectful, but an outright abuse of power?" Richard frowned, unable to comprehend why Victor was taking this so seriously. Scoffing, he replied, "You're still talking about that girl from the restaurant, right?" He let out a dry chuckle. "That was just an accident. I don't see why it should be such a big deal. Besides, I was the paying customer. Everyone there knew who I was." Victor remained unfazed. His expression remained cold as he delivered his next words with precision. "Yes, you may have been the one paying. But that doesn't give you the right to demean others simply because they don't have the wealth or power that you do. I don't think you fully grasp this yet. But you will, once everything starts collapsing around you." For the first time, Richard felt a chill creep up his spine. There was something unsettling about the way Victor spoke, something different from the usual confrontations he had experienced before. But he refused to let it shake him. "Listen," Richard said, leaning forward slightly. "I don't need a moral lesson from you. Victor. You work in finance, I run a business empire. If you think you can intimidate me, you're sorely mistaken." Victor finally stood, looking at Richard with thinly veiled disdain. "I don't need to intimidate you. I just want you to understand that sometimes the wrong decisions come with consequences you can't foresee." Richard watched Victor's every move, still unable to grasp the true weight of his words. He had yet to realize how far he had overstepped, how his arrogance had set events in motion that he could no longer control. As the meeting concluded, Richard stood abruptly, unwilling to entertain any more of Victor's veiled warnings. He still believed he had control over everything. But deep down, something felt different. For the first time in a long time, Richard felt the slightest trace of doubt. And yet, he didn't know, he couldn't know, that the storm was already coming for him. And this time? He was standing right in the center of it. Richard couldn't sleep well after the meeting with Victor. The man's words kept echoing in his mind. even as he tried to convince himself that everything would be fine. He reassured himself that he still had power. Still had money, enough to fix any problem. But an unsettling feeling continued to haunt him. No matter what. Victor Blackwell was not someone to be taken lightly. The next morning, when Richard arrived at the office, the atmosphere had shifted. The employees were working as usual. But something was off. It was as if everyone could sense that something was about to happen. As soon as Richard stepped into his office, his secretary, a young woman named Anna, rushed in with a worried expression. "Mr. Richard, I just received a call from an important partner," she said, handing him a business card. "They've cancelled all contracts. Every single deal we had with them has been put on hold." Richard frowned, unable to believe what he had just heard. Cancelled? Why? Haven't we already signed all the agreements? Anna hesitated before replying. They didn't give a clear reason. But I think it might be because of what happened with Victor Blackwell. It seems like he's interfered with our business dealings. A powerful shock hit Richard, making him feel as if he had lost his footing. He had been too arrogant, too blind to recognize the true influence of those who held real power in this society. Victor Blackwell wasn't just a skilled financier, he had connections, influence, and authority that Richard had never even considered. For a few seconds, Richard stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He forced himself to regain composure and protect his image. "It's fine, Anna. I'll handle this. Contact our other partners and make sure we don't lose any more contracts." But the streak of bad luck didn't end there. Within a week of his meeting with Victor, Richard found himself gradually being pushed to the sidelines of the business world. Contracts were delayed. Partners began pulling out. And even some major investors started withdrawing funds from his projects. The worst part was that Richard couldn't immediately grasp the full extent of what was happening. Then, one day, as Richard sat in his office, another call came in, this time from one of his top lawyers. "Richard, I have some bad news," the lawyer said, his voice tense. "We've just received notice from the authorities. Several of our contracts are under investigation for potential unlawful interference in business dealings. I believe all of this might be connected to Victor Blackwell." Suddenly, Richard felt as if his entire world was crumbling around him. He couldn't believe that a single mistake, a moment of arrogance, had set off a chain of events that now seemed impossible to stop. Now, he was caught in a storm of his own making. In the following days, Richard began to notice that it wasn't just the cancelled contracts. Major business transactions he once thought were untouchable also started to collapse. Partners gradually withdrew. Business relationships grew distant. And worst of all, his name began appearing in the media, not for his success, but for vague allegations of abusing power to manipulate the market. Despite his enormous ego, Richard couldn't suppress the growing panic inside him. He tried reaching out to his executives, seeking support from his closest allies. But all he received in return was silence. Everyone knew that. At this point, no matter what they did, they couldn't afford to be associated with a man teetering on the edge of total ruin. For the first time in a long while, Richard was forced to face his father, the one person he had always believed would help him through any crisis. "Father, I don't understand what's happening. I've never done anything wrong," Richard said, his voice filled with frustration. His father, a man of equal influence, looked at him with a stern, unwavering gaze. "You don't understand? Everything you've done, every decision you've made, They all have consequences. You disrespected people without thinking about the price. And now, you're only realizing it. Everything is falling apart. And there's no one left to save you. Richard was stunned. Everything was slipping through his fingers faster than he could grasp. What he once saw as freedom and power had now crumbled into nothing but ruins. Each passing day, Richard could feel himself deteriorating. Every morning, he no longer woke up with the excitement he once had. The vast rooms of his mansion, filled with expensive possessions, now felt like a gilded prison, one he couldn't escape from. Trapped within the chaos of his own thoughts. The arrogance he had nurtured for years. The self-confidence he once believed was his greatest weapon, had now become the very shards of destruction that he couldn't piece back together. Unanswered calls, ignored emails, all served as relentless reminders of his mistakes. Of how he had dismissed humility, and the true values of life. All the connections he once had. The people he once considered friends. Were no longer there? They avoided him, not because they couldn't forgive him, but because they could see that Richard had lost himself. He was no longer the man they once admired but someone who had belittled others just to feed his own ego. And yet, in his darkest moment, an unexpected call came. It was Victor Blackwell. Richard. Victor's voice was as cold as the first time they met. Do you feel like you've gone too far? Richard didn't respond immediately. He could only hear his own weary sigh through the phone. Finally, he spoke. His voice barely above a whisper. As if he was speaking to himself rather than Victor. I was wrong. Everything I did, I was too arrogant to think about the consequences. What do I do now? Victor didn't rush to answer. A minute of silence passed. As if he were considering his response. Richard. The lesson you're learning right now isn't an easy one. But if you want to stand back up, you need to acknowledge your mistakes and face them. The consequences won't just disappear. But how you handle them will determine whether you can truly change. Richard said nothing. Feeling a painful tightness in his chest. He thought about the past, when he was powerful. When he had everything in his hands. And how he had lost it all because of his own misguided decisions. Victor. He finally spoke again. This time with more resolve. I don't think I can fix everything that's happened. But I will try to change. I won't let arrogance and division ruin my life any longer. Victor smiled through the phone, not a smile of satisfaction, but one that acknowledged Richard still had a chance. It's never too late to change. Learn humility. Learn to see yourself clearly. That's the most important thing. After the call, Richard felt something unfamiliar, a sense of awakening. He realized that in this life, only those who respect others, who remain humble, and who learn from their mistakes can truly grow. In the days that followed, Richard began to change. He started engaging in charity work, helping those less fortunate. And most importantly, he learned the value of listening and learning from those he had once looked down upon. No longer did he see himself as the sole authority in every matter. Instead, he learned to share power and respect those around him. Though he knew he couldn't change the past, Richard was determined to start over. He worked to rebuild relationships with old friends and business partners he had wronged. And while the road was far from easy, he understood that only by truly changing himself could he begin to repair the world around him. Victor Blackwell had taught him a lesson that would stay with him forever. Arrogance was not a sign of strength, but of weakness and ignorance. And now, though Richard was still a man of wealth and power, he had learned a profound truth. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in humility. In listening, and in respecting those around us. What do you think about Victor's sharp revenge and Richard's unexpected transformation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching.